The day my brother, Ethan, got together with Chloe, the girl who bullied me in high school, my depression relapsed. He shielded Chloe behind his back, terrified I'd lose control and hurt her. But all I could think of was my freshman year, when Ethan sent me away to that boarding school. I remembered when Chloe was ripping my hair out, and I managed to call Ethan's number. His annoyed voice echoed through the speaker. "What are you throwing a tantrum for now? Can't you just grow up?" He hung up. Chloe laughed, stubbing her glowing cigarette right into the back of my hand. The pain was so agonizing I blacked out. When I woke up, Ethan was kneeling by my bedside. He was sobbing, begging for my forgiveness. I was diagnosed with severe depression. He dropped out of college and worked day and night to pay for my therapy. During my worst episodes, I'd hold a kitchen knife, my hands shaking violently. He would hug me, tears streaming down his face, choking out apologies. But now, Ethan stood in front of Chloe, looking at me with pure exhaustion. "It's been 2 years, Maya. We're all exhausted. How much longer are you going to torture me?" I hid my trembling hands behind my back. In my grip was an acceptance letter to a prestigious art exhibition in Paris. I had come here to share this incredible news with him, but now there was no need. Depression episode. I practically fled back to my art studio. This tiny studio was something Ethan had saved up for a whole year to rent for me. During my 2 years of recovery, this was the only place where I felt safe. I reached out to touch the dried watercolor on the canvas. The scar on the back of my hand caught my eye. Over the last 2 years, I had almost forgotten how badly it used to hurt. Ethan and I only had each other growing up. He raised me. During my freshman year of high school, he sent me to a boarding school. I was quiet, introverted, and hated socializing. Naturally, I became the perfect target for bullies. They poured water all over my bed. Since I couldn't sleep there, I curled up in the corner, only to be dragged into the restrooms. I told the counselor. He just gave me a dismissive smile. "We don't have students like that at our school. If you're being picked on, maybe you should think about what you did to cause it." Terrified, I called Ethan again and again. But Ethan was working multiple jobs to pay for his classes and support me. The third time I begged him to take me home, he snapped. "Maya, I told you. I have to work. I don't have time to babysit you." I swallowed my tears and endured it. But they only got worse. They threw bugs into my lunch. They dragged me to the rooftop, laughing hysterically at my pale, terrified face as they took turns slapping me. With their cruel laughter ringing in my ears, I dialed Ethan's number with shaking fingers. "Ethan, please come take me home." Ethan's furious voice came through. "What are you throwing a tantrum for now? Can't you just grow up?" The line went dead. Chloe caught up to me. She grabbed a fistful of my hair, pulling back hard. The stinging pain in my scalp was nothing compared to the sheer terror in my heart. I cried, begging her to stop. But she just laughed and slapped me across the face. They pinned me to the floor. Chloe held a lit cigarette, pressing the burning cherry directly into the back of my hand. "Still waiting for someone to save you?" I don't know how long they kicked and beat me. I just curled into a ball, losing consciousness in the pouring rain. When I opened my eyes, Ethan was kneeling in front of me. He was crying so hard his entire body shook. "Maya, I'm so sorry. This is all my fault. I'm taking you home. Don't be scared." He cried desperately that day. I had never seen him cry like that before. He held my hand and swore he'd never let anyone hurt me again. But only 2 years later, he became the one hurting me. By the time I snapped out of my thoughts, the studio was pitch black. I didn't know how long I had been sitting there. My phone lit up with a call from Ethan. I answered. "Maya, where are you? Stop acting out. Chloe made your favorite dinner. Come home and eat." If I wasn't at home, I was always at the studio. But he couldn't even bother to walk over and look for me. Hearing him say Chloe's name made my stomach turn. A wave of nausea hit me. I dry heaved for a long time, but nothing came up. The security guard, Marcus, heard me during his night patrol. Seeing my state, he panicked and reached for his phone to call Ethan. "Oh my God, Maya, is it happening again? Are you okay?" "I'll call Ethan right now. Hang in there." My fingers shook violently as I grabbed Marcus's arm. "Don't tell him." A text from Ethan popped up on my screen. "Maya, I'm giving you 10 minutes. This was Ethan's warning sign before he lost his temper. My mind drifted, suddenly remembering 2 years ago, during my first major depressive episode. Back then, I couldn't eat anything. The moment I saw a stranger, I would reflexively start gagging. In just a month, I became skin and bones. Ethan would push my wheelchair out so I could get some sun, while I stared blankly at the birds in the distance. One night, Ethan came home from work to find me holding a kitchen knife. Paling with fright, He rushed forward to stop me. Triggered and terrified, I screamed and shrank back. "Stay away from me. Let me go. Please let me go." With bloodshot eyes, Ethan lunged forward and locked me in a hug. The knife left a long, deep gash on his arm, but he didn't seem to feel the pain. He just held me, his voice cracking. "I'm sorry, Maya. I'm so sorry. It's my fault. I didn't take care of you." With Ethan holding me, I slowly calmed down. That incident left a prominent scar on his arm. To keep me from feeling guilty, he always wore long sleeves, even in the dead of summer, to hide it. But today, when I went home, he was wearing a short-sleeved t-shirt. I stayed out all night. Ethan didn't call me again. The next morning, he came to the studio. I had sat in front of the canvas all night. Black paint had completely bled through the entire fabric. Ethan looked at the painting, fell silent for a moment, then reached out to gently stroke my hair.
"I'm sorry, Maya."
"I lost my temper yesterday. Can you forgive me?" My eyes stung with tears. But the next second, he knelt on one knee in front of me, looking into my eyes, practically begging. "Chloe has an art exhibition coming up soon. I want to let her use the studio for a while. You can paint at home during this time, okay?" I stared at his face. My mind went completely blank for several long seconds. I realized I couldn't comprehend what Ethan was saying. This studio, it was the key to my recovery. I had painted so many of my breakthrough moments on these canvases. This place was my entire world. But now, Ethan wanted to hand the sanctuary over to the very person who had broken me. Ethan held my hands. "Chloe knows she was wrong. She's been apologizing to me for the past 2 years." I stared at him, numb. She went abroad to study art for 2 years just to clear her head, and she came back specifically to apologize to you. "It's been 2 years, Maya. It's time to let it go." I didn't understand. Does 2 years of time automatically erase someone else's trauma? I stared blankly at Ethan's lips moving. He was spitting out words that made absolutely no sense to me. In the end, a harsh truth dawned on me.
Right.
Out of the 3 of us, I was the only one who had actually been hurt. That was why Ethan could choose forgiveness so easily. That night, my depression flared up again. With trembling hands, I choked down my pills. Tears streamed down my face, but my chest felt completely hollow and numb. I forgot that Ethan had already packed up all my things from the studio. When I walked in, seeing Chloe sitting in my chair, holding my favorite paintbrush, my body suddenly stopped obeying me. My knees buckled. I slammed against the doorframe, a loud ringing filling my ears. Soft, upbeat music was playing in the studio. Chloe sat bathed in the warm sunlight, while Ethan stood beside her, watching her with a relaxed, tender smile. I hadn't seen Ethan look like that in a very long time. Ever since I got sick, his youthful spark had been completely ground down by life. Whenever he looked at me, his eyes held nothing but worry and exhaustion. I went back to our apartment and sat before a blank canvas. I held a pencil so tightly the sharp edge sliced into my finger, but I felt absolutely nothing. From that day on, I stopped trying to see Ethan. But I could tell. Ethan's mood was getting better by the day. Finally, one day, he looked at me hesitantly. "Maya, there's an art exhibition nearby that you'd love. Wanna go?" A tiny spark of light flickered in my long dead eyes. I followed Ethan to the gallery, only to see Chloe there with her own featured pieces. Ethan closely watched my reaction. "Chloe has some art on display here. If you don't want to see her, you can just look at the other artists." As soon as he finished speaking, he hurried off to help Chloe set up. I stood there alone, quietly admiring the paintings I loved. During those countless suffocating nights, staring at these kinds of paintings was the only thing that gave me the will to live. The gallery curator recognized me. He walked over and struck up a conversation. Then, he asked out of curiosity, "We invited you to participate in this exhibition last month, but your representative said you didn't have time. I didn't think we'd see you here today." I froze.
What?
The curator smiled and glanced over at Ethan. "Since you declined, we ended up choosing that artist over there. Though her work lacks a bit of soul, Ethan highly recommended her to us." It felt like a bomb went off in my head. Last month, I had submitted an application for this exhibition. The coordinator told me I'd get a response in 3 days, but I waited a week and heard nothing. But now, the curator was telling me that I had declined the invitation. My laptop was in the studio. The only person besides me who had access to it was Ethan. My gaze drifted across the crowded gallery, finally landing on Ethan, who was standing right next to Chloe. While I was drowning in despair over not getting a reply, Ethan had declined the invitation on my behalf. And he had recommended Chloe instead. Clearly, Chloe had already become far more important to him than I was. My phone buzzed with an email notification. It was an official acceptance letter from an art agency in Paris. I looked up again, watching Ethan's gentle smile in the distance. Then I booked the earliest flight out of the country. I slipped away from the exhibition without a sound. I walked back to my studio, which was now completely contaminated with Chloe's presence. I stood there in silence for a few minutes. Then, grabbing a thick black marker, I drew a massive, aggressive X right across her centerpiece painting. That night, Ethan stormed into the apartment, screaming at me in a fury. "Maya, when did you become so malicious? That was Chloe's main exhibition piece. You ruined her painting. What is she supposed to do at the gallery tomorrow?" I watched his outrage with dead eyes. "She got into that exhibition by stealing my spot, didn't she?" Exposed, Ethan's face flashed with panic. "Your mental state was unstable back then. That's why I declined it for you. Chloe's style is very similar to yours anyway. I only recommended her. She earned the spot herself. Because of my ongoing treatment, Ethan had always managed my submissions. As my point of contact, all the gallery directors knew him well. If he recommended someone, they wouldn't think twice." My hands shook. I grabbed everything within arm's reach and hurled it at him in a frenzy. Ethan didn't try to comfort me like he used to. Instead, he slammed the door and left. I sat in front of my canvas all night again. The next day, Ethan came back with my favorite pastries to apologize. He knelt before me, crying and begging for forgiveness, just like he did 2 years ago. A sharp ache pierced my chest, and my tears fell alongside his. It was true that Ethan had sacrificed so much for me over the years. He pulled me into his arms, gently patting my back. I remembered when we were kids, having no parents, being bullied by other kids. I would hide in his arms and cry, and he would always comfort me like this. I finally sobbed out loud, but Ethan remained on his knees, his hands clenched into fists. After a long, tense silence, he looked up at me with red, pleading eyes. "Maya, can you do me a favor? Please." By the time Ethan dragged me to the exhibition venue, I could barely feel my own body. I followed him inside like a mindless zombie. The moment we stepped through the doors, dozens of camera flashes blinded me. "Miss Maya, is it true that Miss Chloe bullied you 2 years ago? Your brother, Ethan, claims that your depression is cured and that you've forgiven Miss Chloe. Is that true?" Chloe's art had gone viral online, but someone she had bullied in the past had exposed her on social media. The media dug deeper and eventually found me, her most traumatized victim. Ethan carefully guided me onto the stage, facing the sea of flashing lights and probing eyes. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. Ethan had begged me. He begged me to tell everyone that I had forgiven Chloe. He had tears streaming down his face, claiming that if I didn't help, Chloe's life would be ruined. My limbs went entirely numb. I could hear Ethan whispering frantically from the side, urging me to speak. Suddenly, the giant screen behind the stage flashed with my medical records from 2 years ago. Photos of my bruised, scarred body were displayed for everyone to see. Finally, the screen showed my official diagnosis of severe clinical depression. I stared at the medical report. My vision began to blur. The weight of all those staring eyes was suffocating. Below the stage, Ethan was looking at me with desperation, pleading with his eyes for me to say the words, to tell everyone I forgave the person who had shattered my life. My vision went completely black, and I collapsed off the stage. When I woke up, the hospital room was empty. Ethan had left a note on the bedside table. "Chloe is in a really bad place right now. I have to go be with her." I threw the note into the trash. With weak, trembling steps, I walked out of the hospital. Without packing any bags, I went straight to the airport. My body was physically exhausted, but my mind had never been clearer. Only one thought consumed me. I had to get out. Before powering off my phone, a call from Ethan flashed on the screen. He asked frantically, "Maya, where are you?" "The doctor said you aren't cleared to leave the hospital yet." I didn't say a word. I just shut down the phone. The engine hummed a low, continuous vibration beneath my feet as the Boeing 777 cut through the midnight clouds. I sat by the oval window, staring into the pitch-black sky. In my lap, my phone was powered down, a cold piece of glass and metal that held 2 decades of my life and the man who had built it, then torn it down brick by brick. For the first time in 2 years, my hands weren't shaking. They were cold, but still. Across the Atlantic, 8 hours behind me, the hospital room had long since emptied. Ethan had returned to the ward 3 hours after I left, carrying a paper cup of lukewarm soup from the cafeteria. He had spent those 3 hours comforting Chloe, who was hyperventilating in her apartment, terrified that the social Media backlash would destroy her emerging art career. When Ethan pushed open the hospital door, expecting to see me sitting quietly on the bed like I always did, all he found was a crumpled blanket and an empty nightstand. The note he had left, "Chloe is in a really bad place right now. I have to go be with her," was missing. He called my phone. "The subscriber you are reaching is currently unavailable." He called it 3 times, 10 times, 20 times. "She's just throwing another fit," Ethan muttered to himself, stepping back into the corridor, rubbing the back of his neck where tension had knotted into hard muscle. "She's just trying to make me feel guilty." He drove back to our apartment, expecting me to be curled up on the sofa in the dark, waiting for him to soothe her. But the apartment was silent.
The air
Smelled faintly of dust and old coffee. He walked over to my easel. The blank canvas sat empty, untouched. Panic, slow and needle-sharp, began to prickle at the edges of his mind. He ran down the stairs and drove straight to the studio he had taken from me, to hand to Chloe. He used his key to unlock the heavy door. Inside, Chloe was sitting on the sofa with a glass of red wine, scrolling through her phone with a bitter expression on her face. The centerpiece painting, the one I had slashed with a black marker, was tilted against the wall, its ruin glaring and obvious under the studio spotlights. "Ethan?" Chloe looked up, her voice sharp with annoyance. "Did you find her?
is
She going to post a statement online to clear my name, or what?" The comments on my Instagram are getting vicious. Someone posted a picture of her medical record from high school. Ethan didn't answer. He scanned the studio. My paints were missing. My favorite set of badger hair brushes, the ones he had bought me for my 18th birthday, were gone. "Did she come here?" Ethan's voice was unnaturally tight. "No," Chloe sneered, swirling her wine. "Why would she? She ruined my peace and ran away like a coward." "Honestly, Ethan, I know she's your sister, but she's completely unhinged. You've let her manipulate you for years with her depression. She's ruined my launch." Ethan stared at Chloe. For 2 years, Chloe had presented herself as a delicate, remorseful young woman who had grown up, regretted her high school mistakes, and desperately wanted to make amends. He had believed her because he needed to believe her. He needed to believe that the world was fixable, that the girl who shattered his sister had become someone worthy of redemption, because if Chloe was forgiven, then Ethan was forgiven too. If Chloe wasn't a monster, then Ethan hadn't failed as a protector. But standing in the glare of the studio lights, watching Chloe complain about her social media comments while my art supplies were gone, a strange, cold pit opened in his stomach. "She's not at home," Ethan said slowly. "Her phone is turned off. So, let her throw her tantrum." Chloe snapped, standing up. "She'll come back when she runs out of money. She can't survive without you anyway. She doesn't
even have a job."
Ethan turned around and left without saying another word. It took Ethan 2 days to realize I wasn't hiding in the city. He checked every park where I used to sit when the sensory overload became too
much.
He checked the public library, the quiet riverbanks, the small bakery down the street. Finally, in desperation, he went back to the art studio in the middle of the
night.
The security guard, Marcus, was sitting in the booth, drinking tea from a thermos. When he saw Ethan, his face hardened instantly. "Where's she, Ethan?" Marcus asked, stepping out of the booth, his voice laced with uncharacteristic disapproval. "I'm looking for her, Marcus," Ethan said, his eyes bloodshot, his clothes wrinkled. "Have you seen her? Did she come by to pick up any remaining canvases?" Marcus looked at Ethan for a long, silent moment, then spat on the pavement. "She came by 3 days ago, packaged her private sketches, took her paints, and left. She looked like a ghost, Ethan. Do you have any idea what she said to me when I offered to call you?" Ethan's throat tightened. What did she say?" "She begged me not to," Marcus said softly, his eyes filled with pity and anger. "She was shaking so badly, she couldn't hold her keys. She told me, if he comes, I won't be able to leave." "What did you do to her, man? You used to be the only thing keeping that girl alive." Ethan stumbled back a step, as if he had been struck. He rushed up to the studio, ignoring Chloe, who was sleeping on the daybed. He began tearing through the drawers of the desk he had moved out of my room to make space for Chloe's easel. At the very bottom of the drawer, under a stack of Chloe's old rough drafts, he found a blue folder. Inside was a copy of an email printed out 3 weeks ago. It was from the Académie des Beaux-Arts in Paris. "Dear Miss Maya, we are pleased to inform you that your portfolio, The Invisible Wound, has been selected for our International Artists Residency program in Paris. Ethan's breath hitched in his throat. Below the printed email was a single receipt for a one-way flight to Charles de Gaulle Airport, dated for the very afternoon I walked out of the hospital. Ethan dropped the paper. His legs gave out, and he hit the wooden floorboards with a heavy thud. The date on the acceptance letter was from a month ago. It was sent the exact same week he had gone into my laptop, opened my email inbox, and declined the local gallery invitation on my behalf so he could give the spot to Chloe. I had known all along. I had known that he stole my opportunity. I had known that he sacrificed my art for Chloe's reputation. And I had sat there, quiet, numb, watching him lie to my face day after day while I quietly prepared to vanish from his life forever. Maya, Ethan choked out, pressing his palms against his face.
Tears leaked
through his fingers, dripping onto the cold wood.
Maya, no.
Please. From the daybed, Chloe stirred, waking up to the sound of his quiet sobbing.
She
pulled the silk blanket around her shoulders and groaned. Ethan, what's wrong with you now? It's 3 a.m. Ethan pulled his hands away from his face. He looked at Chloe sitting in the studio he had sacrificed his sister's sanity to pay for. He looked at her clean, unscarred hands, her annoyed expression, her absolute lack of concern for the girl whose life she had destroyed twice over. For 2 years, he had convinced himself that Chloe was a victim of circumstance, that everyone deserved a second chance. Now, looking at her, the scales fell from his eyes, leaving behind a scorching, agonizing clarity. Get out, Ethan said. His voice was dangerously quiet. Chloe blinked, taken aback. What? Get your things and get out of the studio, Ethan repeated, his voice rising, breaking on the edge of a scream. Get out. Paris smelled of wet asphalt, freshly baked brioche, and damp earth. My apartment in Belleville was tiny, a single room under the eaves of an old stone building with a slanted ceiling and a tall French window that looked out over a maze of zinc rooftops. For the first 2 weeks, I barely spoke to anyone. My representative at the agency, Julian, a tall, gray-haired man with sharp eyes and soft voice, didn't force me to socialize. He gave me the keys to the attic studio, pointed to a corner stacked with blank canvases, linseed oil, and jars of pigment, and said only one thing. Do not paint what you think people want to see, Maya. Paint the darkness until you find the door out of it. The first few days were agonized. My depression did not magically disappear the moment the airplane touched down in France. It followed me like a heavy, suffocating wool coat. Every night, I awoke in a cold sweat, hearing the sharp, metallic snap of a cigarette lighter. I would reach for the back of my left hand, feeling the raised, puckered scar tissue that Chloe had branded into my skin 4 years ago. On the 10th night, unable to sleep, I pulled a massive canvas into the middle of the room. I didn't draw an outline. I didn't plan the composition. I poured deep, heavy ultramarine and burnt umber onto the white linen. Using my palette knife, I dragged the paint across the surface with raw, furious strokes. I painted the rain at the boarding school. I painted the yellow glare of the hallway lights. I painted a giant, looming shadow of a boy holding his arms out in a protective embrace, but if you looked closely at the edges of a shadow, his fingers were holding tiny, invisible threads that bound the girl beneath him, pinning her to the floor. It was Ethan. Not the Ethan who was a monster, but the Ethan who had loved me so fiercely and neurotically that his love became its own form of violence. The brother who sacrificed his youth for me, and then, suffocated by the burden of his own sacrifice, demanded that I erase my pain so he could feel like a good person again. My hands trembled as I painted. The scar on my hand throbbed. Tears dropped into the wet oil paint, creating tiny, pale circles in the dark canvas. I painted until the gray light of the Parisian dawn spilled through the window, bathing the room in soft indigo. When I finally put down the knife, my chest rose and fell in a slow, deep rhythm. For the first time in 4 years, the crushing weight on my ribs was gone. I looked at my hands. They were covered in blue and black paint, but they were still. Back home, Ethan's world was crumbling into ash. After kicking Chloe out of the studio, she retaliated. Enraged by his sudden betrayal, she went on live stream, painting herself as a victim of a toxic, unstable family. She claimed that Ethan and I were mentally unstable and that she had been dragged into our family drama against her will. She expected the internet to take her side. Instead, it lit a fire. A former student from our high school, someone who had stayed silent for years. Out of fear, posted an anonymous video. It was a recorded voice memo from 4 years ago, captured in the school restroom hallway. The audio was grainy, but the voices were unmistakable. "Please, Chloe, stop, it hurts." My sobbing, high-pitched voice.
Shut up.
"You think your brother is coming to save you? He hates you. He sent you here because you're a freak." Chloe's sharp, cruel laughter, followed by the sound of a slap and an agonizing scream. The audio went viral overnight. The public reaction was swift and merciless. Chloe's sponsors dropped her within 24 hours. Her upcoming gallery showcase was cancelled. The art world closed its doors in her face, branding her a hypocrite and an unrepentant abuser. Chloe tried to run back to Ethan, knocking frantically on his apartment door in the middle of the night, weeping, begging him to defend her, to say the audio was fake. Ethan opened the door. He looked at her with empty, bloodshot eyes. He didn't yell. He didn't slam the
Door.
He simply handed her a box containing all her left-behind clothes and art supplies. "Ethan, please." Chloe sobbed, grabbing his sleeve. "You love me. You said we could start over. You said Maya was over it." Ethan looked down at her hand on his sleeve. He remembered the scar on his own arm, the scar he had gotten when he tackled me to save me from the kitchen knife 2 years ago. He had worn long sleeves for 2 years to protect my feelings, but the moment Chloe smiled at him, he had rolled up his sleeves, eager to move on, eager to pretend the pain never happened. "I never loved you, Chloe," Ethan said, his voice flat and dead. "I just wanted to pretend that what happened to Maya wasn't that bad. I wanted to believe you were a good person, so I didn't have to carry the guilt of leaving her in that school." He gently detached her fingers from his arm. "I ruined my sister for you," he whispered, "and I will spend the rest of my life hating myself for it." He closed the door. Ethan spent every cent he had left. He sold his car. He canceled the lease on the studio. He quit his job. He hired a private investigator to track down where the Académie des Beaux-Arts had stationed me, but international privacy laws were strict. The agency refused to give out my address or contact information to anyone claiming to be family, especially after Ethan's name was flagged in connection with a high school bullying scandal that had flooded the art news. He flew to Paris anyway. He didn't know where I lived. He didn't speak French. He wandered the cold, winding streets of the city with a worn leather backpack and a photograph of me in his pocket. Every morning, he stood outside the gates of the main gallery district, watching the young artists pass by in their paint-splattered coats, hoping to catch a glimpse of my face. He slept in a cheap hostel near the Seine. Every night, he had the same nightmare. He was back in his old college dorm room 4 years ago. His phone was ringing on his desk. He picked it up, heard my trembling voice begging him to come take me home, and heard himself yell, "What are you throwing a tantrum for now?
Can't.
You just grow up." In his dream, he tried to scream at his past self to stop, to put down his books, to drive to that school, and pull me out of that hell. But he was trapped in his own memory, forced to watch his younger self hang up the phone over and over again. He woke up choking on his own sobs, his hands gripping the thin, hostile blanket. Months turned into a year. Ethan ran out of money. He took a job washing dishes in a small bistro near the Canal Saint-Martin just to stay in the city, just to have enough euros to pay rent on a room the size of a closet. He looked 10 years older. His hair was streaked with gray at the temples.
His
hands, once smooth from office work, were now rough and cracked from hot grease and cheap dish soap. He wore a faded, long-sleeved shirt every day, even in the muggy heat of the Parisian summer. The scar on his arm throbbed constantly, a quiet, aching reminder of the girl he had abandoned twice. 2 years after I left, Paris was wrapped in the crisp gold of late autumn. The Grand Palais was hosting the Prix de la Création, one of the most prestigious contemporary art exhibitions in Europe. Giant posters hung from the stone arches along the Champs-Élysées, featuring the lead artist's centerpiece painting. The poster displayed a striking, haunting image, a massive black canvas with a thin, glowing crimson line cutting through the center, surrounding a faint, golden silhouette of a woman walking into the light. The title of the collection was simply L'aube, the dawn. The artist's name was printed in sharp, white lettering at the bottom, M.A.Y. Ethan was wiping down a table outside the bistro when he saw a discarded cultural magazine on a chair. He picked it up, turning the pages absent-mindedly, until his eyes hit a full-page feature. There was a photo of me, I was standing in front of a white wall in a tailored cream suit. My hair was longer now, pulled back into a sleek, elegant knot. My eyes were calm, clear, and steady, looking directly into the camera lens with an effortless grace that I had never possessed in my entire life. Beside the photo was an excerpt from an interview. Question: many of your works deal with severe trauma, betrayal, and deep psychological
Pain.
Do you still hold resentment toward those who hurt you? Maya, I used to think that forgiving them was the only way to heal. I was told that holding on to pain was a flaw, that I was torturing the people around me by staying hurt. But I realized that forced forgiveness is just another form of violence. I don't hate them anymore. Hate takes too much energy. I simply left them behind in the dark where they belong, while I walked into the sun. Ethan sat down heavily on the bistro chair. His hand shook so violently that the magazine nearly slipped from his fingers. I left them behind in the dark where they belong. She didn't hate him. She hadn't spent the last 2 years plotting revenge or weeping over his betrayal. She had simply outgrown him. She had moved on so completely that his existence was no longer even a scratch on her life. The exhibition opened that evening at 6 o'clock. Ethan spent the last of his dishwashing wages on a clean black suit from a second-hand shop. He washed his face, slicked back his hair, and walked 3 miles through the cold autumn air to the Grand Palais. The exhibition hall was magnificent. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, glittering light over polished marble floors. Hundreds of guests, critics, collectors, journalists, and art lovers moved in. Quiet reverence between the large-scale canvases. Ethan slipped through the crowd, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Every painting on the wall was a piece of my soul. He saw paintings of cold rain, of dark rooms, of glowing cigarette embers. The pain of my past. But as he walked further into the gallery, the paintings changed. The colors grew warmer, brighter, exploding into brilliant yellows, sky, blues, and vivid corals. The final room was bathed in soft, warm light. And there I was. I was standing near the central canvas, holding a glass of sparkling water, speaking fluent French to an elderly art collector and his wife. I smiled, a genuine, warm, beautiful smile that crinkled the corners of my eyes. Ethan stopped 10 feet away, his breath caught in his throat. For 2 years, he had imagined this reunion 1,000 times. He had imagined throwing himself at my feet, crying, begging for my forgiveness, promising that he had cut Chloe out of his life, promising that he would spend the rest of his life making it up to me. He had pictured me crying, slapping him, yelling at him. Anything to show that I still felt something for him. But watching me now, surrounded by light, surrounded by people who respected my talent, surrounded by a peace that he had never been able to give me, he realized the awful truth. He didn't belong in this room. He was a phantom from a dark, ugly past, standing in the middle of my bright, beautiful present. Maya. The words slipped out of his mouth before he could stop it. It was barely louder than a whisper, but in the quiet space between the crowd, it carried. I stopped mid-sentence. Slowly, I turned my head. Our eyes met across the crowded gallery. The silence between us felt like an ocean. Ethan took a step forward, his eyes filling with tears, his hands trembling at his sides. Maya, it's me, he choked out, his voice raw with 2 years of accumulated grief and regret. I found you. The gallery patrons turned to look at him, surprised by the emotional outburst. From a man in an ill-fitting second-hand suit. I looked at him. I looked at his haggard face, his hollow cheeks, the subtle hunch of his shoulders that spoke of long months of hard labor and sleepless nights. I looked at the long sleeves of his jacket, covering the scar he had carried for me. 2 years ago, this sight would have destroyed me. I would have felt an agonizing mix of guilt, fear, and desperate love. I would have thrown myself into his arms, terrified of losing the only family I had left. But now, I felt nothing. Not anger, not hatred, not even sadness. It was like looking at a stranger who resembled someone I used to know a long time ago in a bad dream. I turned to the collector beside me, excused myself with a polite nod, and walked slowly toward Ethan. Ethan's eyes lit up with a desperate, frantic hope. He reached his hands out to
grab mine.
Maya, I'm so sorry, he sobbed, tears spilling down his cheeks, oblivious to the crowd watching us. I was wrong. I was so wrong about Chloe, about everything. I burned all her things. I haven't talked to her since that night. I've been looking for you for a year. I wash dishes at a restaurant down the street just to stay here. Please, Maya, come home with me. I'll make it right. I swear to God, I'll make it right. I stopped 2 feet away from him. I didn't reach out. I didn't take his hands. Ethan, I said softly. My voice was calm, clear, and utterly steady. Hearing his name on my lips, Ethan froze, looking at me with wide, pleading
eyes.
Yes? I'm here, Maya. I'm right here. You don't need to wash dishes anymore, I said, looking into his eyes. And you don't need to wear long sleeves to hide that scar. Ethan blinked, confused. What do you mean? For years, you wore long sleeves because you wanted me to feel guilty, I said. My tone as quiet and objective as if I were describing a painting. You wanted me to remember how much you sacrificed for me so that I would never leave you. And when you got tired of being my savior, you brought Chloe into my life to force me to grow up so you could finally be free of your guilt. Ethan's face went completely pale. No, Maya, I loved you. I raised you. You did. I agreed gently. And I will always be grateful for the boy who raised me when we had nothing. But that boy died the day he hung up the phone, while I was being burned. Maya, please. Ethan fell to his knees right there on the polished marble floor of the Grand Palais, grabbing the hem of my trousers, weeping hysterically. Don't do this. You're my only family. I have no one else. I looked down at him. The security guards were already stepping forward, concerned by the scene.
I
held up a hand gently to stop them. I knelt down in front of Ethan, bringing myself to eye level with him. I reached out and gently laid my hand on his shoulder. My touch was light, cool, and devoid of any warmth. I forgive you, Ethan, I whispered. Ethan looked up, a wild flicker of hope breaking through his tear-streaked face. You forgive me? Yes, I smiled, a quiet, distant smile that broke his heart into a million irreparable pieces. I forgive you, not because you deserve it, and not because you fixed anything, but because I am done carrying you. I stood up. Goodbye, Ethan. I turned my back on him and walked toward the center of the gallery where Julian and a group of art critics were waiting for me. Behind me, Ethan tried to stand, tried to call my name, but his legs gave out. The security guards gently but firmly took him by the arms, guiding him toward the exit. He didn't fight them. He didn't scream. He allowed himself to be led out into the cool Paris night. He stood on the grand stone steps of the Grand Palais, watching the heavy glass doors swing shut behind him. Inside, bathed in brilliant light, I was surrounded by applause, laughter, and celebration. Outside, the rain began to fall, a soft, cold Parisian drizzle that soaked through his cheap suit. Ethan stood in the rain, looking at his trembling hands. He pulled up his left sleeve, staring at the long, white scar running down his forearm. He remembered the day he got it, the day he held me while I screamed, promising that he would never let anyone hurt me again. He had spent 4 years blaming Chloe, blaming the school, blaming my depression, and blaming the world for breaking his sister. Only now, standing alone in the rain outside my triumph, did he finally understand the devastating truth. The person who had truly broken me wasn't Chloe. It was him. Chloe had burned my hand, but Ethan had burned my heart. He sank down onto the wet stone steps, burying his face in his hands, letting his weeping be swallowed by the sound of the falling rain and the distant hum of traffic along the Seine. 3 years later, in a small coastal town in the south of France, the sun shone brightly over the turquoise Mediterranean Sea. My new studio sat on a cliff overlooking the water, filled with sunlight, white linen curtains blowing in the sea breeze, and the sweet smell of turpentine and lavender. I sat by the window, sketching a quiet sunrise on a small canvas. My phone rang on the wooden table. It was an international news report from back home, sent to me by Marcus, the old security guard who still kept in touch with me once a year. The article was small, buried in the local business section. Former regional art curator, Chloe, was sentenced to community service and ordered to pay restitution following a civil lawsuit involving stolen artistic, intellectual property, and historical assault charges. I skimmed the headline, felt a brief, passing moment of mild reflection, and closed the link. It didn't trigger a panic attack. It didn't make my hands shake. It was just news about a stranger living in a world I no longer belonged to. As for Ethan, Marcus told me that Ethan had returned home 6 months after his trip to Paris. He didn't go back to his old corporate career. He took a job at a local community center, teaching basic drawing classes to troubled teenagers and kids from low-income families. He lived alone in a small apartment. He didn't date. He didn't socialize. On his living room wall, he hung a single poster from my exhibition in Paris, the one with the crimson line breaking through the dark into the light. He never called me again. He never tried to look for me. He had finally respected the only boundary I had ever set for him. He let me go. I put down my pencil and stepped out onto the balcony of my studio. The warm sea wind brushed against my face, lifting my hair. I looked down at my left hand resting on the white railing. The scar on the back of my hand was still there, a pale, permanent mark against my tan skin. I traced it softly with my thumb. It was no longer a sign of my weakness or a memory of my pain. It was simply proof that I had survived the fire, walked through the dark, and built my own sunrise. I picked up my paintbrush, dipped it into brilliant, glowing gold, and turned back to my canvas.